All right, well, welcome everyone to our CTech Alumni Panel. We got three really fantastic guests today, which we're going to introduce in just a moment. But we're going to take some of the questions that the CTech students had that you came up with, and we're going to have the alumni address them, and then whatever else comes up, comes up. This is going to be archived for future reference. So without further ado, let's go ahead and meet some of our participants. I'm going to start with the eldest alumni, and we'll go to the most recent alumni, and then we're going to kind of invert back and forth. So we're going to start out with Jessica Danby. Jessica, why don't you do just a brief little introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Jessica Danby. I'm a software engineer at Intuit, which they call anyone working with code a software engineer. But I specifically do front end, so HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I graduated CTech in 2012.
I'm Bryan Henson. I'm a product designer for a company called BorrowWorks, focused on financial tech and lending practices. And what I do there as a product designer kind of encompasses a lot of UX, UI, some marketing, pretty much everything design, but it's more business focused and focused on the business aspect of all of those different umbrellas. And I graduated in 2018.
So I am the marketing automation specialist for GM Financial, and mostly on the consumer marketing side. What we do there is I specialize in Adobe Campaign platform, developing all of their marketing email campaigns, and that doesn't just go to email, but SMS, surveys, all of that stuff. And I run it for GM Financial themselves, as well as, partnerships with GM and all the other brands as well. And I was a CTech major in 2013.
It's hard to pinpoint, but I would say that not all resumes are made the same. Each company that you apply to, your resume should be tailored to that company and what that job description is asking for. And so taking whatever job description it is, making sure that your resume matches up to that. If they are requiring a cover letter or it's an email, that all needs to be relatable. It needs to be in your voice. It needs to be something focused on, what you can bring as far as value to that company. And that goes back to, to the beginning when I was talking about doing your research on a company. You have to do research on a company. What kind of voice are they, projecting to people? Is that a good fit for you? But you have to be yourself, I think, first and foremost, if you're writing a cover letter. And then your resume should be, if you're a recent college grad, the first thing that I look for if you're a recent college grad is your college section should be first. Your education section should be first. That is your most recent experience. I want to know what you did in college. I want to know what awards you got. I want to know if you were on the dean's list for specific semesters, and then what kind of organizations you were a part of, because that's big too, about knowing whether or not you're an activist or whether or not you're specifically part of an organization. I think that's big as well. If you're a leader in that organization, obviously that brings more on you. So recent college grads, again, put your college education first, and then your awards, and then you can go into some of your other previous job experience as well. But again, not all resumes are made the same. Not all job descriptions are the same, and you should not have a blanket resume for every single job that you're applying for.
Resumes were like my thing for at least like a year or so when I graduated, because I tried really, really hard to craft like the ultimate resume so everybody could be impressed by me. And I got a lot of help from, people that just had experience in writing well-written resumes, and I had a lot of people review them and check them and make sure grammatically it's correct and all of that, so before I submitted them. And I probably created like 20 different versions of my resume, and they're all labeled by like the job that I was trying to apply for. And I still have them to this day because, maybe one day I'll pull that resume out and, if it fit that job description, I'll send it to that one. One thing that stood out to a lot of people was creating like a brand logo for myself. And I kind of noticed that with other templates that people had created online as well. There's a lot of companies that are using like software to just scan resumes and look for words that relate to the job or the person that they're wanting to hire for the job. And that's why it's important to kind of put those keywords in there. There's SEO for you. So using keywords is an important factor. And I've also learned that using numbers is actually something that people really like in a resume.
If you think about it from an SEO perspective, there's backlinks, there's everything else. So what other links are linked to that company? Better Business Bureau if it's somebody that's had a complaint. LinkedIn is huge. I mean, look at who works there, who previously worked there, where they are now. Maybe somebody who's had your previous job at that company. Where are they, and how much have they progressed? Yeah, their website is great because it does give you what their values are and things like that. But it can be dressed up a bit. They may not give you exactly what happens behind the doors, and so take it with a grain of salt. Look more at LinkedIn. Glassdoor is another great resource because salaries are posted on there as long as you're logged in. People will also review companies that they've worked for before. Again, take those with a grain of salt because some of those people may be, salty about their job. So, but it'll give you a good idea about what the company culture is like if multiple people have reviewed. And like, for example, Intuit probably has pretty good reviews on their Glassdoor page. And it probably has a treasure trove of data of what people make as far as their salaries are, and then what kind of company culture that builds. And then if you tag that with LinkedIn, you'll find out where those people are, where they've been, what kind of experience they had before they worked at Intuit. That's kind of how I deconstructed it, trying to figure out what the company was, who worked there, and then break it down based on position and salary. And I will be honest, my current company, there wasn't a whole lot of information, but what was out there was very positive. And the biggest one that was a seller for me was they were a small business winner for Fort Worth in 2018.
Award.
So it was an award that they won. They were a small business winner, which was big for me because it showed growth potential, and that's really what I wanted.
Usually whenever you first start, you go to the company webpage, I would look for their values section or like about them. You don't need to remember like the hard facts, like when they were founded or anything like that, but it's just get a vibe for what values and what that company really stands for. And then that way you can kind of try to see if you align with that, because if you don't align with it, then it's not a good fit. But if you do align with it, you can pepper that into either your resume, or even if you land that interview, see if you can kind of really emphasize that whenever you're conveying what you're passionate about, and show them that your passions and their passions intersect. In addition, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, great resources. I would actually use, this kind of ties into resume and getting resources, but once you really nail down that resume, use LinkedIn to really kind of fill in those, either add your resume, essentially like fill in LinkedIn as if it's a resume, and then fill in the additional spots LinkedIn gives you with any gaps that you feel are missing. Like, I know the top part gives you an opportunity to, like, I don't know, it's like 500 characters. It's a pretty big text box, but really use that for your elevator pitch is what people typically call it. But like what you're passionate about, what you love doing. And then that way, whenever someone lands on your page, they can see exactly what you're all about. Tied into that, again, once you have your resume, once you kind of have your LinkedIn profile built, tons of recruiters, whether they're technical recruiters, whether they're job recruiters, what have you, will use LinkedIn to scan for profiles that match what jobs they're trying to fill. I wouldn't rely just on recruiters stumbling across your profile. I would also do research into recruiting companies that you can then work with. The one thing I didn't realize about recruiting companies is I thought that they were providing me a service, so I would have to pay them to land me a job. That is totally not true. It is a free resource for you. They want to have a huge pool of candidates because it's actually the company that is paying them to try to fill the role. So reach out to, I've only ever worked with one recruiting company at a time. There might be value to working with multiple recruiting companies at a time to try to land a job. I don't have experience with that, but the recruiting company, once you are paired with them, they will actually help tailor your resume to whatever job you are landing. And because they have that connection with that company already, they know exactly how to tailor that resume. And then usually they already have a relationship with the hiring manager, so they can start trying to prep you for what to expect in the interview, what to expect with the job negotiations, all of that. I think using recruiting services is like I would not be where I am today without recruiting services. Like they are just amazing, and I think everyone needs to use them. And some recruiting companies are going to be better than others. I have heard some recruiters doing some shady practices, but once you really if you find a recruiter or a recruiting company that you like or feel is a really good fit, I mean, even after you land that job, maybe you're looking for another job like 5 years later, however long, whatever, you do you, but you can always come back to them and then they'll find you another job.
Yep.
I think it's
go
ahead.
Being on the receiving end of a recruiter, I didn't use a recruiting service to get my current job, but being on the receiving end of recruiting, they absolutely try to find the right candidate for the company, and they will go out of their way to figure out exactly what the company needs and whether or not that person is a good fit. And we mainly use it for development and developers, not for UX yet. But I have the relationship built with the recruiter now that I could reach out and be like, this is exactly what we're looking for. Can you help find a person? It's so much of an easier process. I think Jessica makes a great point that, a lot of people wouldn't be, and especially in development and coding and web development and UX, people wouldn't be where they are right now without recruiting services. I think it's a vast resource that people underutilize, or they think that it's a shady practice. They're used car salesman style, nothing against used car salesmen, but the stereotype. That is not how recruiters are for the most part. A majority of them are not that way. I think it's a resource that people underutilize, though.
Whenever you're starting out, whenever you're trying to land that first job, having a separate portfolio website, I think, is so important, because what they're going to want to see, they know that you don't have the professional experience. So you need to be able to show them that you have the experience just doing the thing, whatever it is. So for front-end development, that's my expertise. That was creating a website. Whether it was just a simple website, HTML, CSS. I don't even think there's any JavaScript right now on my portfolio, but it's just the main design. And I've used that over the years as an opportunity. Anytime there's like a new bleeding edge CSS thing that I want to try to learn and understand, like back in the day, that was Flexbox. So I completely redesigned my portfolio to use Flexbox. Then I completely redesigned it to use Grid. Or like if there's any JavaScript thing that you want to try to learn, maybe implement like an interesting animation for a dropdown, something like that. Like you can use your portfolio as a way to learn. And in addition to that, any projects, whether you do them through freelancing, through your schoolwork, through projects, just side projects, like you want to just do, you have an idea and you just want to do it. You can then link those into your portfolio so that you have different sections to showcase those products or projects. And then that way, whenever you do submit your resume, you can have your website as part of that resume. You can also link your resume onto LinkedIn, which for SEO, link backs help promote your website as well. So the more places you can link it, the better. But whoever's going to be looking at your resume or potentially interviewing you, being able to see your portfolio website will give them so much more of an indication of what your experience is. I've even in the past done a inspect on their portfolio to see like what kind of code they write. And then that way, even before I meet you going into the interview, I kind of already have an idea of what style of code you write or how you think in terms of like layout and design. Like I already have that context. And so that's just a very powerful tool as me as an interviewer that I can use to then get to know someone. And I would prefer to interview someone with a website that, as long as the website isn't completely terrible, I would rather interview someone with a website than someone without a website because I already have so much more context on that person.
I have a lot of different different ideas around this, but just to kind of add on to what Jessica was saying is that expect them, if you do have a portfolio, expect them to inspect it. If most of the time I'm on a desktop, and so the first thing that I will do is check for responsiveness, and therefore you have to open the inspect element. I'm going to look at any errors that are being thrown, JavaScript errors, things like that. If that is important to the job that you're applying for, obviously that would be a red flag. Responsiveness is huge in UX, and so understanding responsiveness and designing mobile first is important as well. If you didn't design it mobile first, you're probably not going to think that whenever you come onto the job, or I have to teach you that. So that's another hurdle that I'm probably going to stop and maybe pick the candidate that did do responsive first, or did mobile first. So I think another aspect too is a very nicely culminated portfolio. I don't need every single project that you did. If you have 2 spectacular projects, put 2 spectacular projects, not 8, with 6 of them not being that great. I'm probably going to look at the first 2 if I have time. So put your best work first, and that's probably going to happen in the first 2 projects, whatever it is. And this is strictly speaking for UX. I can't speak too much for anything else, but make sure that you're laying out what the problem and solution was. Documentation, again, going back to documentation, is huge. So if you're doing a project in specific UX, what kind of research did you do? What was the problem? What was the solution? How did you whiteboard it? What was the exercise that you did? What kind of communication did you have with people who were actually doing the code? Did you actually do the code? So labeling all that out inside of a portfolio is important. And that leads me back to, if you're applying for a UX job or a UI job or a product design job, anything that is design focused, I want to see a portfolio. I will tell you 99.99% of the time, I won't consider you if you don't have a portfolio. It doesn't have to be online. A lot of the times our postings will be a PDF as well. If you have a PDF, send a PDF. I actually have both. So I have a website and I have a PDF, just in case they don't want a website. Some companies don't want a website. They don't want to go to your personal website, maybe because it's not a secure website or whatever else. So be prepared for both situations. But if you're applying for a UX or UI job, expect that they want a portfolio, and then expect to talk about that in an interview, and then expect to expand upon it even further in the second interview or third interview, whatever process that they have. They're going to want to talk about the projects that you did, and it's a great way to lean on something when you're in an interview as well. because you can always reference back to the project that you did before. Maybe you can relate one of the business values back to something that you did. Maybe you can sell yourself further by expanding on something on your portfolio that they weren't necessarily looking for or they didn't see in your portfolio. I think it's a great resource for designers in general to lean on, especially if you're design heavy. Maybe you're not communication heavy. If you're design heavy, lean on your portfolio, make it great, cultivate it, culminate it, and make sure that those projects are very clear in what you did and your role.
By the time a student graduates in CTech, how many websites would you say they need to have completed to be competitive? If you're going into something where that is related to a website.
It depends on what you mean by a website, because I mean, you can do like a single page application where, like, for me,
or a
I'm
project.
just
How
gonna,
about a project?
yeah, I would say, as someone entering the field, I want to see their personal website, which could be considered a project, but you're not going to label it as a project. And then I want to see probably one or two either other websites or smaller applications. So if they're interested in doing front end, it doesn't need to necessarily be a whole other website. It could even just be a small little one-page React feature. Like maybe they built like a little to-do app, or, you know, for me, like one of the things I did as an interview, take home coding test, they were like, build something with React to show that you know how to code in React. So I just built like a dice roller that created a random D&D character. Like it just rolls stats for a D&D character, and then you just like hit refresh and it like rolls a different one. So like just small little things like that could even be considered a project.
Yeah, and even for UX, I would say that I call them feature focuses, but maybe a feature that you would add to a website, something that's focused, that like you can list out a very small amount of information, but it something that helps me understand what your design thinking is, and then your problem solving as well. It doesn't have to be a full project. Those take tons of time, but that's not what I work on day to day. I work on smaller features. And something that graduates would work on is something much smaller. I don't expect you to build an entire application coming straight out of college. I'm going to give you a feature to add to a website. Maybe, like, for example, at my current company, we have a dashboard where people pay. It's similar to like a banking app. Maybe there's a new feature that we want to do. Like I just worked on a feature focus based on a notification center. Expanding our notification center. So that may be a good prompt to start a project. Those little things are great for UX, and something spectacular that can fill up your portfolio, and it can be a separate section, maybe just feature focuses, and then list them all out. It doesn't have to be a full project. But to the original question of how many do I expect 2 fairly large projects that maybe they worked on in college, something in 4350, something with a client, hopefully. If not, it needs to be very focused on a client, and what that interaction might look like if by chance they didn't get to work with an actual customer in 4350, maybe just an imitation of it.
How many jobs did you actually apply for before you actually landed your first one? Anybody want to take that one?
I can take that because I meant to say it's exactly how everybody feels. It became a full-time job. You sat there all day every day applying for anything and everything, and it doesn't matter if you only got 40 applications in and only 5 interviews. But the more you put yourself out there, the more somebody's going to find you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can follow up too, if that's okay. I think I applied to 15 that I knew that I wanted. I think I applied to more than that, obviously, but 15 that I knew that I wanted the job. And I knew that I was not necessarily qualified for all of them, because I think that's another misconception that people have, is you may not qualify for something and therefore you don't apply for it. Throw that out. if they think that you are qualified, then they will call you and they want you. So don't be afraid to apply for something that you may not qualify for, you don't think that you're qualified for. If you're pretty close to it, and don't pay attention to 3 years of experience or 4 years of experience. Maybe they want somebody that has less experience, but that number does not matter that much. So I think that's kind of another thing that I brought into it, was not to focus so much on the qualifications and get focused on what company I wanted to work for.
And Jessica, you just kind of landed in your job. So and sometimes that happens, right? That's the value of getting an internship, and people that have internships, or companies give it, they do that sometimes with the intention of, a job evaluation. So that's why it could really help you, and I think that's what happened. Is that fair to say that's what happened to you?
Yes, that is what happened. I will say, after that internship, I have gone through the process of applying for jobs. But I would like to add that, yes, you're going to have those top companies or like your dream job to work for. Especially when you're starting out, I would just put your resume and put out job applications literally to anything. Because even if it doesn't really interest you that much, just going through the motion, and if you get that interview, going through the interview process is going to be practice for when you do find the company that you really want to work for. And especially with job interviews, it is something that does take a little bit of practice. And when you first start out in the job field, interviews can be really, really intimidating. But the more you do it, the less of a big deal it is. And so just the more practice you get into doing that, and the more applications, and the more, like I said, even if you're not interested, do it anyways. It's great practice. So getting your first job, pretty intimidating, but everyone says once you get your foot in the door, that's the biggest hurdle, right? I was lucky enough to be told about an internship, and I applied my spring semester senior year to an ad agency called Concussion. It's now called Pavlov, I believe, but they're based in Fort Worth. And they liked what I did, and they offered me a job after I graduated. So I was pretty lucky with that. The biggest thing with that internship, I think, is showing a desire to, as an intern, you are not going to be super knowledgeable in all of the things at like even an entry level position. But if you show a desire to learn and a curiosity and that passion and a fire behind that, that is going to show that you can grow into that position. And that helped me, because I don't know, that was whenever I was like a super go-getter, which I still kind of am, but I was younger then, so I had a little bit more energy.
Yeah, this is my first job after graduating CTech. It certainly isn't my first job. And my previous experience before landing this job, I was in the Army for 8 years as a designer. And so I used some of that experience to kind of help me land my first job. But really, one thing that I did was I treated finding a job almost as a full-time job. So I did it all day, every day, very focused, and I did a lot of research on the companies that I did apply for. I didn't blanket apply for every single job that came available. And then also trying to find a culture fit as well. So whenever you go into an interview for any job, you'll know whether or not it's a good fit or not. You'll know whether or not the company is right for you, and you'll get that feeling almost immediately. It's a little bit more difficult these days because I would assume that virtual interviews are happening more often, and so it's harder to get a feel about the company by not being there physically. But virtual interviews, you'll also get a feel for how the people are and what the culture is based on how those people interact with each other and then interact with you as well. But treat it like a full-time job, and I think that focused energy will definitely help you land a job.
So my first job, I started off with Mauser Electronics, which is not a small electronics company but not too many people are out there, especially young people like us, coming out of school, and this is just going to be your big fancy job. I didn't really have any luck getting out of school. Once I graduated, it was like, what do I do next? And of course, just like anybody else, you want to start off at the big fancy job with all the bells and whistles and whatnot, but you also are looking for experience. And I wasn't really in a place to turn down an internship even after I'd already graduated. And originally I'd wanted to go there as a UX designer. That's what they'd picked me up on. And hoping to go into something a little bit more technical. But I had a little bit of SEO background, and they said, you know what, why don't you just try this? And I said, I guess, maybe this might be something, I don't know, let's experiment. And it landed me an internship for a few months and then turned into a full-time job. So I learned a lot more than I thought I would, just beyond SEO. And it really gave me the skill sets to put me in the position I am now. And I met a lot of people that got me to the place where I am. So, and now that I'm at GM Financial, which is kind of a huge stepping stone for me, it kind of helped me find the job and the place that I wanted to be at. SEO wasn't really just for me, and it wasn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I jumped into something new that I had no idea how to do. So take chances. And really just believe in yourself, because you will learn, just like Jessica said.